Right, okay, good evening, everyone. So, it is a pleasure to warmly welcome you all to today's academic session. We truly appreciate your participation and enthusiasm for research learning. So, this session focuses on understanding how to develop a clear and meaningful conceptual framework academic research uh, framework in academic research. Participants will learn how to identify key research variables, establish logical relationships between concepts, and translate research problems into structural analytical models. The session will also guide learners in formulating theoretically grounded hypotheses and visually presenting research ideas. By the end, participants will gain practical skills to strengthen the coherence, clarity, and academic quality of their research designs. Today, we are pleased to welcome Ms. Diniti Lakshani, an emerging academic and research professional with a strong background in management and scholarly publishing. She holds a Master of Business Administration from ACIE University and currently serves as a coordinating editor of the Journal of Marginalized Communities and Social Justice. Through her editorial and research work, she actively contributes to promoting inclusive, social relevant, and methodologically sound academic research. Ms. Lakshani has practically experience in guiding researchers on structuring their studies, particularly in developing clear conceptual framework that strengthen analytical rigor and research coherence. Her academic interest focuses on linking theoretical perspectives with real-world social economic issues, enabling researchers to produce impactful and publishable work. In today's session, she will provide valuable insights into organizing research variables, visualizing conceptual relationships, and developing logically grounded hypotheses to enhance the overall quality of scholarly research. Here, Ms. Dinisi Lakshani, so you can continue the session now.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So, first of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to participate in this research methodology lecture series. Actually, this is a profound honor to contribute to this Journal of Marginalized Communities and Social Justice workshop series. So today I am going to discuss about conceptual framework and hypothesis development. I will share the presentation, but before that, I would like to remind you that it is very important that you have an understanding about problem identification and finding literature. That is the basis of building a conceptual framework. So I will share the presentation with you. I hope this is visible. Uh,
Yes, it is Ms. Lakshani. It is visible.
okay. Okay, so as I highlighted, so knowledge about the research problem identification and literature review process is very important for this. So I hope you attended the last two sessions conducted by this workshop committee. So yesterday you received a very good session related to how to identify research problem and how to develop a research topic. So that is very important. And in a previous lecture, you had got an idea about researching, finding literature, how to find literature and how to find credible sources. Those are very important in developing a conceptual framework and building hypotheses. So I'm moving on. So these are the objectives. So in this session, you will understand what is a conceptual framework. Uh, and there are different types of variables we use. Okay, so you will understand what types of variables we are going to use and the differences between those variables and how to develop a conceptual framework based on a research problem you identify. Then, how to formulate a clear, testable hypothesis. Then, to visualize that conceptual framework. Okay, so first we will start from an introduction to conceptual framework. Actually, why does the conceptual framework matter in a research? Using a conceptual framework is a necessity of a quantitative study, actually. You should use a conceptual framework. It is very much important to use a conceptual framework in study because that acts as a blueprint of the research. So blueprint means only a guidance. So this conceptual framework guides you. You are the researcher, so it can guide you to develop the entire structure of the research, structure of the study. So we call it as a blueprint of the research, conceptual framework. And and decide based conceptual frame and decide what data collection methods have to use and what data analysis to use. As I told you now, this is the guidance of a study. Define the structure. That means that it's you what literature you should search for and what sources you should refer to, what relationships you need to search for, and what methods you need to use in like these data collection methods and analysis methods, and then how to analyze uh, the data you collect. So that can be defined by the conceptual framework. So that is very important part of an of a quantitative study. Then it improves the logical flow and academic quality of a research. Okay, so a strong research, a strong thesis should have a conceptual framework. I mean, if you are doing a quantitative study, it is better if you could include a conceptual framework, and that improves the logical flow, as I told you before. It defines the flow of the study, how you search for literature, how you review it, and how you the logical flow, and therefore it improves the academic quality. I believe that some of you are undergraduates, so you have to submit a thesis at the end of your qualification. So if you need to improve the quality of your paper, the thesis, you can go for a quantitative study and include include an effective, that should be effective conceptual framework that can increase your marks you receive. So then it enhances the chances of publication acceptance. If you're planning to submit an article to a journal, then using a conceptual framework demonstrate or reflect that you are using a logical method to gain outcomes you prefer to to fill the gap you identify. So actually reviewers look for clarity and structure of the study. If they see that you have included the conceptual framework, they can clearly identify what you have looked at, and the structure is clear because it is logical. And there is a theoretical grounding when you are using a conceptual framework. I will explain that later. So theoretical grounding is there. So that makes a strong paper. A strong conceptual framework does not just organize your research, it strengthens its credibility and the publishability. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So, what is the meaning of the conceptual framework? What is the meaning? Actually, that is a visual representation, right? The conceptual framework is always a visual representation. You show the relationships between variables uh, and it demonstrates the variables. So that is a visual representation of relationships among those variables. Then it explains what influences what. That means there are different variables, there are different types of variables. So you can clearly understand what variable influences what through the conceptual framework. It is clearly visible. You can clearly demonstrate you study what variable influences what variable. And it shows why and under what conditions relationships exist. So as you know now, this is a visual representation. So this shows the relationships among the variables. So then this conceptual framework shows and explains the mechanisms behind relationships and uh, may strengthen them, the relationships. You can show the impacts and relationships under what conditions it may increase or decrease the relationships. Okay. Then we are talking about importance of for academic publications. Why the conceptual framework is important for academic publications. Uh, so most of you are, I think every one of you are academics. You are engaged in your work related to research, potential researchers, so undergraduate or already there are I have seen there are so many participants registered for this workshop that there are some are doctors likewise. It is important to highlight the importance for academic publications in terms of conceptual framework. So it enhances the clarity of your paper and the logical structure because you have to follow certain logical steps to decide on the conceptual framework, right? So it enhances the clarity of your study, of your paper when you are publishing a paper. So that gains more attention from the reviewer of the journal. And there is a logical structure that reviewer understand that this person, this scholar has followed a logical structure. Then it demonstrates the theoretical grounding. You must, actually, you must refer to a certain theory or previous literature. So it demonstrates by including the conceptual framework, it demonstrates that the paper you are going to publish has a theoretical grounding. You have to present that also in under the literature review. You have to explain the theoretical framework you are referring to. I will explain that later. It demonstrates the theoretical grounding, which improves the quality of your research paper you are going to publish. And then it support strong hypothesis formulation. Once you build the conceptual framework, it clearly defines the relationships. By just looking at it, you can easily understand what hypothesis I should analyze, I should make. What the hypothesis means, it is an assumption. I will explain that later. So that supports strong hypothesis formulation. Without a conceptual framework, you might be confused what variables to choose, what data I should collect, likewise. So for an academic paper, you should have strong hypothesis. So that is based on the conceptual framework you design. Then it improves research quality and credibility. Obviously, if you follow a logical structure, if you have a strong theoretical grounding for your study, theoretical backing through literature, maybe uh, established theoretical frameworks. So you have a good theoretical grounding and strong hypothesis. Then obviously the quality of your study, your paper enhances. And the credibility is also enhanced because you have followed a strong scientific method throughout the process of the research, and there is a strong theoretical grounding. Then it is essential for publication in peer-reviewed journals. So when you are submitting your paper to a peer-reviewed journal, then provided that you are doing a quantitative study, it is better you could include a conceptual framework, and therefore it shows that you have followed that the logical method in completing the study. So reviewers are very welcome these conceptual frameworks, but that must be effective and theoretically grounded. You have to prove it through hypothesis first. So it is very important that you include a conceptual framework to your potential paper you are going to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. That will earn additional points to you. Then let's look at the conceptual versus theoretical framework. So these two concepts look similar. Both are frameworks, right? But there are differences. Conceptual framework is always based on variables. that always defines how the variables are related. So researcher always have to search for variables to when he or she developing a conceptual framework. And a theoretical framework is always based on a certain theory. There are established theories. I took examples like social learning theory, cognitive theory. You can decide what theory you could use based on your research problem, research gap you have identified. So that is based on a theory, always based on a theory. That does not involve variables. And then conceptual framework is a model created by the researcher. Okay, but that should be based on previous literature. You have to search for literature before building the framework. You have to identify variables through the literature, but you can change variables and change the framework based on your research problem. So that is a model that is created by uh, the researcher, by you. And but a theoretical framework is an already established framework, which grounds the study. So you cannot change it because it is already established. You can refer to it to gain an idea, understanding about the framework, about choosing variables, but you cannot change it. Then conceptual framework is study specific. It is specific to a particular study. If you are using a conceptual framework in one study, you may change that framework in the next study or the next paper. So that is specific to one study. So it is study specific. On the other hand, a theoretical framework is more general and it is drawn from recognized theories in literature. As I given you a few examples, it is not specific to a study. You can use the same theory in several studies. You do several papers. You do. So those are the differences, but both of these concepts, frameworks are very important for a quantitative study because you have to include both. You should mention what theoretical framework you referred first to develop the conceptual framework. Don't worry, I will explain. So both of these frameworks are very important and compulsory. If you are using a conceptual framework, then there should be a theory. You have to explain the theory, discuss the theory, why you chose this theory to this study, to this conceptual framework. Okay. So I'm taking an example topic here. Since we are referring to this journal is about marginalized communities. So I took a topic, example topic, research topic actually, about effect of inclusive education practices on academic performance of students with disabilities. So students with disabilities is the scope of the study that covers the marginalized one type of marginalized communities. So we are looking at how the inclusive education practices can improve the academic performance of these students. So we are taking this example to explain other concepts hereafter. Okay. So we are first looking at the research variables here. We are going to look at the research variables. First, we are looking at the types of variables. These are the basic variables we use. Okay. The first type is the independent variable. Okay. So independent variable is also known as an antecedent or a predictor. Then dependent variable is also known as the outcome variable and control variables. So why we call antecedent, uh, we call independent variable as antecedent. So antecedent means it occurs first. So independent variable occurs first. Then the outcome is a dependent variable. So that's why we call dependent variable an outcome variable. Then control variables likewise. First, we will discuss about IV and DV here. Is the presentation visible, something?
Yes, it is.
Okay, give me a second. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to talk about independent variable and dependent variable. Here I have mentioned that it as a IV and DV. IV refers to the independent variable and DV refers to the dependent variable. So the independent variable is the cause or the predictor variable. It is always the cause of an effect, but the dependent variable is the outcome of the independent or the causal predictor variable. So again, independent variable is the cause. It comes first, it occurs first. Then it affects on a variable that is called the dependent variable, which is the effect. Okay, then independent variables always influences other variable. It always influence or affects the other variable. But the dependent variable is influenced by another variable. Okay, dependent variable is influenced by, but the independent variable is influencing another variable. Then the independent variable can be manipulated. You can change the independent variable. You can change variables based on the literature. But when it comes to dependent variable, you measure the effect, you observe the effect, the outcome. Likewise, then as I just mentioned, independent variable comes first in the relationships. You mention it first. Then the dependent variable comes after the independent variable. So if we take the example topic, I mentioned earlier that is the effect of inclusive education practices. I will go to that slide. Effect of inclusive education practices on academic performance of students with disabilities. So here, what do you think? What is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? You can share through the chat. So you are looking at the effect of inclusive education on the academic performance, right? So what you are looking at, you are looking first at the inclusive education practices. Once the inclusive education practices are there, then you can improve the academic performance of students with disabilities. You have to consider that we are looking at not all the students, but we are specifically looking at the students with disabilities. So you can improve the academic performance caused by inclusive education practices. So what is the cause here? Cause is the inclusive education practices. Okay, so the independent variable is the inclusive education practices, and the academic performance is what? The outcome, right? That is the outcome of inclusive education practices. So we call it the outcome variable, or we normally say the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is academic performance of students with disabilities. Okay, so I have mentioned those examples here. The independent variable there is the inclusive education practices, and the dependent variable is the academic performance. Okay. Then we will look at, I have clearly shown this. The topic is the effect of inclusive education practices on academic performance. Uh, for your information, what type of problem you see here, research problem you can see here. You can find different types of research problems, but for example, you may see that there are very few studies, empirical studies uh, related to these concepts that you notice when you are looking for research problem. The previous researchers have not necessarily measured the effects of inclusive education practices on academic performance. So you identify that gap and you are going to measure this effect. So the cause is always the inclusive education practices. So that is the independent variable, and the outcome is the academic performance, which is the effect. So we consider academic performance as the dependent variable. Okay, so that is about independent variable and dependent variable. I hope these two types of variables are clear for you. So we are now going to talk about control variables. So for control variables, control variables remains constant. We keep that variable constant in a conceptual framework so that you can ensure that the results are not influenced by external factors. There can be external factors that could impact. For an example, if we take the same example here, this cause and effect relationship, inclusive education practices, and academic performance, there can be external factors which could impact on this effect. You can share your thoughts, share your ideas about those external factors. I took examples as socio-economic status of the students with disabilities and their age or gender may impact this relationship. These variables are not the main focus of the conceptual framework, but it is important to improve the accuracy and the validity of the results. So we can use control variables to ensure the accuracy of the outcomes. So these variables either cannot change or we can statistically control it. That is a part of the data analysis process, how to statistically control the variables. I'm not going to discuss about that, but when we are working on the regression model, regression analysis, you can statistically control those variables in the regression model. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So I took the same example here, inclusive education practices, which is the independent variable, and the academic performance as the dependent variable. So for an example, I made it simple here. I took only the socio-economic status of the students here. Uh, if you are controlling, so this is the control variable here. If you are controlling the socio-economic status, then you can confidently say, if you are using a control, let's take the example later. If you are using a control variable, you can confidently say that one variable causes another because the conditions are not changed, right? External conditions are not changed. We assume that those are constant, those are controlled. Okay, so for an example, we should be, in this case, we should be able to say that inclusive education practices lead to better academic performance, right? We should be able to say it. We should be able to prove it. So it can be challenging when there are other variables that may also influence this outcome. What is the outcome here? Academic performance. If there are other external variables impacting this academic performance, then we can't confidently say that inclusive education is impacting on or the causing the academic performance, right? So, for example, if we do not control the socio-economic class here, the socio-economic class of the students with disabilities, the students with higher economic status or social class can have better performance because they have better accessibility to the resources, right? If a student has a good economic background, then he or she can easily access to these education practices. So, uh, irrespective, the performance can be improved irrespective of the practices, even if the practices are there. But when we do not control it, these students with higher economic background or this or a social class can have better performance through better resources. If we observe that higher social class impacts on better performance, we cannot confidently say that inclusive education practices cause the academic performance improvements, right? We can't say that. So if we are not controlled that variable, we can just say that there is a relationship between inclusive education practices and academic performance, but it is not caused by the other because there are other external variables that impact on the academic performance. So inclusive education practices does not necessarily uh, give this academic performance outcome, better academic performance outcomes. So isolating the true effect of independent variable is very important. So by controlling these variables, these external effects makes a stronger validation uh, to the conceptual framework. So why do we control variables? So I just explained you the causal effects. So here in the example, we looked at the impact of inclusive education practices on the academic performance. So that is the cause and effect relationship. So to establish valid causality, you have to control certain variables. Then only you can validly say that there is cause and effect. This cause creates an outcome and it reduces biases. So we do not uh, we do not or we always we are, as researchers, you have to be unbiased. So if other variables are influencing, but if you are not considering, not controlling it, then they can distort the findings or you can make biased conclusions. So that does not accurately reflect the reality of the scenario. So you cannot answer the research problem accurately. You can't fill the research gap properly, effectively. Then the control variables always increase the internal validity. That means the extent we can trust the observed effect is due to the independent variable and not some external factor. So the validity is increased when you use a control variable. So how do we control? That is very important, right? How do we control? So we control by design. You can decide on controlling a variable before you start the study. When you are planning your study, you can find ways that minimizes the influence of external variables. For example, here you can decide on using a random sampling method, right? Using a random sampling means you randomly take a sample from the students that does not necessarily look at the socio-economic class. You take every social classes, you consider all economic backgrounds of the students, and you take randomly. You don't consider the socio-economic status of the students. And you can control by environment. How that is done during the study, right? You can control the environment to maintain a consistent condition for all participants. So the condition for all participants when you are doing the study, when you are collecting data from the participants, the condition is same. For example, in this case, if you are referring to this inclusive education practices and academic performance, you can use same classroom setting, okay, or you can uh, consider a certain teaching method, only one teaching method. Then you can collect data under that condition, or a time duration, a specific time duration you collect data. So that can successfully control those external factors. And you can control by statistics. I mentioned this before. When this is done, once you've done the data collection and once you're doing the data analysis part. So you can statistically control variables in the regression analysis. That is a different topic. So I'm not going to discuss in this session. So likewise, you can control variables through these three methods. Okay. Now we are looking at the mediating and moderating variables. These variables are very important in quantitative researches, but their roles are different. There are different characteristics and distinct roles in these two types of variables. These are uh, also a very important part of a conceptual framework. It is not necessary to include a mediator, moderator in your conceptual framework, but if you are going to publish a paper, then it is better to include mediators and moderators because that improves the quality of your. So if you look at them, you can see the image. It actually lies in the causal path of the relationship between independent and dependent variables. So a mediator is used to understand the mechanism or the process through which the independent variable influences the dependent variable. In simple terms, it explains how or why a relationship occurs. Okay, so but we are if we are referring to moderator, that can change the impact of independent and dependent relationship. It affects the strength and the relationship between independent and dependent variables. As you can see, there is an arrow going up to the relationship between independent and dependent. So that means this moderator can influence the strength of this relationship. This is not caused by anything. This is influencing the relationship between mediator and moderate. Sorry, independent variable and dependent variable. So look at the I just told you this mediator in the causal way between independent variable and dependent variable. In other, it helps its mechanism through which independent variable you can understand how does this effect occur. So, for example, in this case, I took a student engagement as the mediator variable. So you can understand how does this affect inclusive education practices on academic performance occur through this mediator or the student engagement. Mediator is considered a theoretical construct. That means it is used to test and explain underlying processes in research. That explains how does this effect occur. So if we take this example here, for variable to act as a mediator, it must be difficulty. This is because the independent variable influences the mediator, and the mediator in turn influences the outcome. If we take an example here, as I demonstrated in this image, this framework, inclusive education practices may improve the student engagement, right? We are referring to students with disabilities. If we use an inclusive education practice, the engagement may increase, right? And increased engagement may lead to improved performance, right? When the students are engaged in class, then their performance may increase. So uh, the independent variable can have an influence on the mediator, and in turn, the mediator can influence the dependent variable. If we go to the moderator variable, actually the moderator variable is different uh, from mediator because it does not explain the relationship, but instead it influences the strength of the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, so that you can understand when or for whom a particular relationship is stronger or weaker. So let's take the same example here. I took the teacher competence as the moderator variable here. Uh, Teacher competence can act as a moderator. Even if inclusive education practices are implemented, their impact on academic performance may vary depending on the level of teacher competence, right? That I hope you can understand. So if the teacher competence high, then inclusive education practices may be more effective, which is leading to better performance, right? However, if teacher competencies are low, then some practices may have weaker effect on academic performance of these students. So I'm repeating again, if you do not understand or not clear on this moderator effect, I'm referring to the example, so I believe that you can better understand. Mm, if the teacher competence is the moderator. So if the teacher competence is high, we all you, you have to keep moderator can influence the relationship independent and variable. So if the competency is high among the teachers we are looking at, then inclusive education practices may be more effective, right? They can effectively use those practices in the classroom. Then the performance of the students, academic performance of the students can be enhanced. Uh, so the moderator does not explain how the relationship occurs, but it changes how strong the relationship is. You can change the strength of the relationship by using a strong moderator. So for that also you have to refer to the previous literature, then only you can choose a moderator variable. If you have any suggestions related to this example, any other moderators or mediators, if you could suggest, please share, others can refer. So I should say that a mediator explains how a relationship works. Okay, how? While a moderator explains and for whom it works best. It works best for whom or when, likewise. Then we are moving into the steps in developing a conceptual framework. So these are the steps in developing a conceptual framework. You have to identify the result first. That is the first step in developing the conceptual framework. So I'm not going to explain in detail how to identify a result problem. You may identify an empirical gap, literature gap, methodological gap, whatever. You have to decide on the research problem through referring to the literature. Then you have to identify themes. So you have to refer to literature more and understand what variables have used by previous researchers or the theoretical frameworks. Some theoretical frameworks are very well explain certain variables in certain studies. So then you have to conduct a literature review. Then only you can identify variables. Once you identify variables, you first identify what is the independent variable, what is the dependent variable, what can be used as a moderator, what can be used as a mediator likewise. So then you can establish relationships. You can decide what affects what. Likewise, so you establish relationships. Don't worry, I'm explaining these. Then you develop a framework, conceptual framework diagram. So these are the basic steps of developing a conceptual framework. So I'm not, as just mentioned, I'm not going to explain about identify research problem and uh, doing a literature review. Those topics are already the previous. So I'm starting. I hope that you have an idea. So let's start from identifying variables. Once you read literature, identify certain constructs, variables. So I, example here, inclusive education practices and academic performance are the main variables. So what is the independent variable? Inclusive education practices. Academics is the dependent variable. So I highlight that you cannot choose variables by just looking at 2 to 3 journal articles. You have to refer to several articles and identify most effective and most significant variables. Okay, so I took these variables. And you can identify dimensions those researchers have considered in deciding on these variables. So, under inclusive education practices, I noticed that the dimensions such as classroom environment and accessibility to learning resources, teaching and learning adaptations are very significantly used by researchers. I have mentioned one source. You have to present this table in your thesis. I believe that you know this. This is not a complete operationalization table, but I use this just to show how you identify variables. There are other columns here. I didn't include it because my topic is here. This is about identifying variables. So under inclusive education practices, these three dimensions are considered in this example. Then academic performance is the dependent variable. So we always measure the academic performance. So we observe the academic performance of the students. We can use the successful completion of tasks or assignments given to them, and their self-efficacy and their attendance punctuality can also be considered as part of the academic performance. So these are the dimensions we considered under these. Then we develop the framework diagram. Okay, so there are 3 dimensions we considered under the independent variable, which is the inclusive education practices. So these dimensions are referred to as the independent variables. There are 3 independent variables. So we can consider these as independent variables. As I mentioned you in the earlier slides, we can manipulate the independent variable. It is better and it is important to include like two to three, at least three independent variables in your study, in your paper or the thesis, so that you can separately identify what affects most. So if we take this example, the classroom environment is the first independent variable, then the second, the accessibility, third is the teaching adaptation. So these three variables you can separately, you can see what independent variable is most impacted on the academic performance. What condition, what variable improves the academic performance the most. Likewise, so this framework, as I said before, this framework demonstrate what you are going to analyze and what will be the outcome of this study. This clearly defines, right? Uh, so I hope this conceptual framework diagram is clear for you. Uh, then we are going to discuss about a good framework versus a bad framework. Here, good framework, good conceptual framework. Actually, a good conceptual framework clearly defines variables. So, in this framework, it defines clearly the inclusive education practices. You have to present this also so that the reader understand how you uh, came to how you variable. So good conceptual frame can define clearly the variables, and the logical relationships between variables can be easily visible. So you can, if you refer to the conceptual framework of the study, then you can understand the logical relationship. Here, this inclusive education practices, so that these three variables, you can understand the relationships. You can understand the classroom, better classroom environment, inclusive classroom environment can improve the academic performance. That means there is a positive relationship. Likewise, you can uh, identify the logical relationships between the variables. So you always based on a theory and literature when building a conceptual framework. So a good conceptual framework is always based on a theory and literature. Uh, a good conceptual framework is simple and you can easily understand, confuse by a good concept work. Then there is a proper use of arrows and directions. So you have to clearly show the arrows and accurately use those arrows and directions. I will go to the mediator. I have shown this mediator variable and the relationship is demonstrated through a case between the inclusive education practice or dependent variable. So you have to use correct pathways, correct arrows, correct lines. So a good conceptual framework should include these. Then it includes only relevant variants. Okay, you have to refer to several literature and find most relevant and significant variables and include those in the conceptual, that is a good conceptual framework. And it have to be with real objects or the research problem. The research problem guide perspective. The concept framework always comes with the objectives and or the research problem. So those are the main characteristics of a good conceptual framework. So what are characteristics of bad framework? If you are using too many or unclear variables, I have seen some students using like 7, 8 independent variables. That doesn't mean that if you're using so many independent variables, doesn't mean that the framework is correct or it is strong. So you have to use the most relevant ones, you not several too many or unclear variables. Sometimes those conceptual frameworks do not have a logical connection between variables. You cannot in the bad conceptual frameworks, or they may be supported by theories or literature. If you are not based on a literature or a theory, you are developing a framework, your framework is, and it is not a good conceptual framework. I have some identified that the actual framework is bad during the Viva session. The Viva panel mentions this is logical conceptual framework. This is not backed by theories or literature. So you have to redo the research. So you have to always support literature in finding variables. Or sometimes you use overly complex uh, frameworks. That is also a characteristic of a bad conceptual framework. So sometimes there are missing arrows or incorrect arrows. Just imagine you have used the arrow from dependent variable to independent variable. So the user or the reader completely confused about the relationship you are going to explain, because you are using inaccurate uh, arrows or lines. Then you sometimes include irrelevant variables, and sometimes not aligned with the research problem. This is a common mistake uh, done by several students. Like they are not referring to the research problem. Research problem thing, and the conceptual framework is something else. You are finding something else. So you have to always align your framework to the research problem. I hope now conceptual framework development part is finished. We are moving on to the hypothesis development. So what is a hypothesis? Actually, it is a testable and falsifiable. You can test the hypothesis. Hypothesis is, in simple words, that is an assumption. So, but you should be able to test it statistically. And it can be falsified. Like if you make an assumption that, in this case, you assume that based on the literature, that you assume that inclusive education practices can increase the academic performance. But in some cases, conditions, this cannot be proved. I mean, there are instances there is no impact of inclusive education practices on academic performance. Hypothesis you build is rejected. Sometimes it can accepted or it can be rejected. So the hypothesis is falsifiable. Hypothesis is both an assumption. It is an assumption and assertion. Assertion means, in simple words, a belief. You believe that this happens, but sometimes it may not happen. But you can reason out why it does not happen based on the practical scenario you're looking at. The condition, for an example, um, you are doing the research in Sri Lanka. So you find literature there, they have proved that there is an impact, but in Sri Lankan context, you may not have found this uh, relationship or the impact. So these assumptions can be falsified. So I took a definition from a paper. I have mentioned the source here. A hypothesis is an assumption where the successful execution of the assumption will cause the expected consequences described in the assertion. Right? A hypothesis is an assumption. Okay? So, where the successful execution of that assumption or the hypothesis will cause the expected results be described in that belief or the assertion, right? So that's about the hypothesis. What are the characteristics of a good, effective hypothesis? The first one is clarity. You have to clearly mention the hypothesis. There should be better clarity in the hypothesis. When you're using the words, it should be clear and concise. And it is testable. You should be able to test the relationship or the impact. Then it should be based on a theory or literature, a certain theoretical framework and literature. So these three are compulsory when developing a conceptual framework. So there are two types of hypotheses. First one is directional, and the second one is non-directional. The first hypothesis I have mentioned, I have said that there is a positive relationship between X and Y. So I have mentioned a direction, positive relationship. That is the direction of the hypothesis. The second one is there is a significant relationship between X and Y. These are X and Y are variables. Okay, I just took an example. So this is non-direction. I have not mentioned the direction here, positive or negative. I just said there is a significant relationship, but in non-directional hypothesis, you should mention the word significant because you test the hypothesis. So the testability is important. So you can prove that the effect or the relationship is significant or not. If the relationship is not significant, then the hypothesis is rejected. Okay, that is done statistically under data analysis. Then writing hypothesis from a framework, that is very important. So you know that deciding on the hypothesis is easy when you build a conceptual framework. So now I'm referring to the cause and effect, IV and DV, independent variable and dependent variable. I have highlighted the arrow here. You can see the bold arrow, that is the H1 or the first hypothesis. That hypothesis is there is impact of education, academic perform. So I just uh, explain directional and non-directional. So what type of hypothesis is this? Directional or non-directional? You can share. So I have not mentioned a direction, right? I have just mentioned that there is a significant impact. You can use either. You can mention that there is a positive impact of inclusive education practices on academic performance. Or you can just say there is a significant impact of inclusive education practices on academic performance. This is simple, very simple. The first hypothesis, I have used the impact of independent variable on dependent variable. Then we move on to the second hypothesis, H2. You can see the dotted line, the bold dotted line here. So the H2, we write it as student engagement is the but mediator. We use dotted lines to usually show the mediator effect. So you can just write it as we use the mediator variable first in the sentence. Student engagement mediates the relationship because that lies in the causal pathway. So student engagement or the mediator mediates the relationship in inclusive education practices and academic performance. This is the way you write it. First mention the mediator variable, then it mediates the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. Then the moderator. Moderator is the teacher competence, right? So that is H3. H3 is written as this is somewhat similar to the mediator relationship hypothesis. We take moderator first, that means the teacher competence. Teacher competence moderates, like I mentioned you before in the mediator example, relationship between inclusive education practices and academic performance. We write it as the moderator, we take first teacher competences, moderates the relationship between inclusive education practices and academic performance. Then, how we visualize the conceptual frame. These are very important, these arrows and lines. If we use independent and dependent relationship based conceptual framework, then you have to use the arrow. straight arrow from independent variable to dependent variable. You have to start it from the independent variable because that is the cause that affects the outcome variable, which is the dependent variable. So arrow goes like this. And for the mediator, you can use the dotted line because that lies between the path of the uh, independent variable and dependent variable. Then for moderator, you can use the arrow because that moderator can impact the relationship between independent and dependent variables. Then for control variables, are the external factors that can impact variables via dependent and independent variables. So if you are using a control variable, then you have the arrow. So practical view here to further clarify this meter hypothesis and model hypothesis.